Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. I hope you had a great day. Today we are looking at some new malicious compliance stories. I hope you enjoy them. The first story is called Thermostat Compliance. My boss was brought up in a household where the solution to being cold was putting another jumper on, to the extent that the inside of the windows used to freeze. Lord knows how many times I have heard that story. Unfortunately, instead of reveling in the marvel that is central heating, my boss feels it's necessary to impose the same draconian rules straight from the 18th century on all of us in the office. In a word, it gets very cold at work. For context, I work in a converted barn, which is both poorly insulated and has a tall vaulted roof. This means any heat dissipates upwards, and the building generally needs a lot of heat to stay comfortable. It is not uncommon to be sat indoors wearing my small down jacket and thermal base layers to keep warm. If I was working outside, I could accept this, but in an office environment, it's unnecessary. I'm a long-standing employee, but in all my time working for my company, there has always been another colleague with a far more vocal opinion on how warm the office should be. For the last few years, for instance, a colleague of mine would make a big parade about cranking the heating up to 24 Celsius multiple times a day. This resulted in a daily tit-for-tat between my colleague and boss. Typically, my boss would see the thermostat, exclaim it's too hot and switch the boiler off at the mains, which meant no heat. I tried in vain to convince my colleague to leave the heating at a reasonable level, say 19 or 20 Celsius. I was certain my boss was unable to actually tell the heating was set higher than his preferred 15 Celsius, unless he could visually see the stats set higher. I was ignored, the tit-for-tat continued, and so did the cold. Roll forward a few years. I am now the only person left in the office other than my boss, his son and an administrator who works part-time. The temperature has started to drop and the cold has been drawing in. The heating was switched on Monday this week and like clockwork was set bang on 15 Celsius. I decided enough was enough and sat down with my boss to discuss the heating. I explained how cold temperatures affect me and asked if he would be willing to increase the thermostat. Surprisingly, my boss was pretty compassionate and promised to increase the heating starting the very next day. True to his word, my boss did increase the thermostat by 1 degree. Apparently, 16 Celsius was his limit. To say I was livid was an understatement. But more disheartening was looking towards another winter shivering at my keyboard. I couldn't stand the thought, so I decided to take matters into my own hand. Two really important bits of information popped into my head that morning that formed the perfect plot in an instant. First, the thermostat was old school, analog, not digital. And second, my boss and his son were out at a meeting for the whole afternoon and the admin wasn't due in at all. Roll on lunchtime, I took it upon myself to research a model of the thermostat. I found an archived manual online, page 3, calibration. I couldn't believe how simple it was to adjust the unit. There was one screw to remove the outer casing which exposed the dial. The dial then simply lifts off the spindle and is rotated and reinserted onto the spindle to calibrate the unit. Armed with my Swiss Army knife, once I was alone in the office, I got to work. Disassembling the unit, I rotated the spindle clockwise by 4 degrees, so now when set at 16, the thermostat would actually measure 20. I replaced the casing and using a relative humidity meter we use for work, I tested the switching point of the stat. The office measured at 16.2 and the stat clicked on around 12. Hearing the boiler fire in the kitchen gave me the biggest grin I have had in ages. That was on Tuesday. The remainder of the week has been glorious. For the first time in 8 years, the office is actually at a constant, comfortable temperature. This afternoon, my boss asked if I was warm enough, again unusually compassionate. I felt kind of bad to go behind his back. But it does give me scope to increase the heating even more when it starts getting really cold in the next few months. I was also pretty ecstatic as it proved the hunch I've had for years. My boss has no idea if the heating is set warmer other than the numbers shown on the stat. So an all-out win for my bit of malicious compliance. The next story is called They Are Your Rules. This happened at my first security gig right out of the military. A good starter job for security work. It was access control at a medium-sized aircraft engine factory. A friend of mine worked HR there, but he also had the title as head of security, so he offered me a job and I accepted. One of the biggest rules were ID checks. Apparently, a few years prior, a couple of people had gotten in with photocopied IDs. So after that, we had to physically check that the ID was plastic. We did this by touching it. Now, do access control enough and you start to memorize people. We didn't check those IDs by touching them because we knew them, and if they had been fired, we would have gotten a notice. Well, that angered the head of HR, so she set some new rules. She wasn't the head of security, but security fell under HR, so she kind of was. All IDs must be checked, no exceptions. No non-employee is allowed through the gate without a notice signed by her or the head of security, and has to be submitted 12 hours prior to the entry, like for people scheduled for interviews. Visitor badges assigned without prior approval can only be done for normal deliveries, like the post office or FedEx. Anyone who violates it will be reported by security to HR for a security violation. That was fine and dandy, we really didn't care. Everything went smoothly for about a month until that one day. Here she comes to the gate, but she isn't driving, her husband is. It is raining, and I mean flood level raining. I asked her husband for his ID, and he says he didn't have one. She saw where this was going and tried to stop me. He was only there to take her in, because it was raining and she didn't want to walk from her car to the building and ruin her outfit. That's when I threw the rules back to her. I didn't have a security notice for him, so I couldn't assign a badge and couldn't let him onto the premise. She tried but it's only 100 yards, which again I reminded her of the rules. She sat down. She actually said, "Well, I'm your boss." Technically she wasn't. "We are going in anyways." To which I replied again her rule that any breaches of the policy must be reported as a security violation. So there she is, dressed to the nines, forced to walk without a jacket to the building 100 yards in the rain to get to her office. Why didn't we lend her a security rain jacket, you asked? Because she said there wasn't enough money in the security budget to buy them. Later that day, she modified the rules that on drop-offs, security has full discretion to allow someone entry for that purpose. We also got our rain jackets 2 weeks later, and she never bothered security again. I hope you enjoyed today's video so far. If you want more content, please subscribe to the channel. And if you like the video, don't forget to press the like button. It really helps the channel to grow. And now, on to the next story. The third story is called Dealing with a Bad Nurse. So in high school, I worked as a certified nurse assistant at a local nursing home. I only worked on the weekend because my parents wanted me to focus on school during the week. Anyone in the health field knows you cannot work with the elderly when you are sick, because some elderly people can die from the common cold. When I was 17, I got really sick. I got sick on a Tuesday with a light cough, and by Friday I was going into a 10-minute coughing fit. The next Monday was Labor Day. My regular doctor was closed all weekend. My parents decided we couldn't wait until Tuesday and went to the emergency room. I had a bad case of bacterial pneumonia. For those who don't know, regular pneumonia usually results from a bad case of the flu or another illness. But a perfectly healthy person can be in Walmart, for example, and walk by another person with BP who sneezes and breathes it in. It's extremely contagious. I was admitted to the hospital and hooked up to tubes. Turns out I was also dehydrated from being so sick. Around midnight I realized I needed to call in, since I won't be able to work the next 3 days. So I called the nurse's desk and told the nurse on duty that I have been diagnosed with pneumonia and won't be able to work this weekend, and most likely the weekend after, due to the possibility that I will still be contagious. She told me, "If you wanted a 3-day weekend, you shouldn't have volunteered to work. You can't fake a cough to get out of work in the real world, sweetheart." Then she hung up. I asked my dad what I should do. He took my phone and took a picture of me in the hospital bed. Then we got a sign out from the doctor and took a picture of that. He then told me to email those to the director of nursing for the facility. I did that and also told her what the nurse had told me. Thing is, at this facility, any calls through the nurses station are recorded to protect the facility from lawsuits and or protect the residents from negligent caretakers. She was on record telling me what she did. When I returned 2 weeks later, I learned she had been suspended for 8 weeks without pay for negligence. The last story is called Don't Believe Me Calling in Sick? This happened earlier this year, not too long after we'd gone into lockdown. We were all working from home and checking in daily with our teams virtually. One evening I start getting horrific period cramps. I'm no stranger to this pain. I'm up most of the night in pain and trying not to vomit, so naturally I'm exhausted and still fighting the pain when the morning rolls around. I message my boss, telling him I'm not feeling well. He rings me to ask what's wrong. It's obviously a pretty embarrassing subject, especially with a male boss. And so I'm deliberately quite vague about it and probably come across as avoiding the questions. Later that day I log into my work emails and see an email from my boss to his manager with my name as the subject. He has accidentally copied me into his email about me calling in sick and being deliberately vague about my illness. He finishes the email with, "We need to keep an eye on this." So I hit reply all and write them both the following email. "Dear boss, I'm guessing I wasn't supposed to be copied in on this. But seeing as I am, I feel I need to set a few things straight. I have been up most of the night with excruciating period pains which make me vomit and not sleep. I have blood coming out of me, my reproductive system hates me, and there's literally nothing I can do about it. I've had this for years, but every now and again it gets too bad for even me to handle, and I need a day off to deal with it. I'm sure you can understand that discussing such matters with my male managers is not easy. Hence the reluctance to talk about this over the phone. If you require any further information, please let me know, and I will gladly assist." Needless to say, I had 2 very hasty replies apologizing for copying me into their emails and emphasizing that periods are not a taboo subject with them, and hoping that I feel better soon. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.